Berlin, 2026. The city was undergoing a massive renovation of its older sectors, tearing down the skeletons of buildings that had survived the firestorms of 1945. Elias, a young architectural historian, was assigned to document the interior of a crumbling villa that once belonged to a low-ranking clerk in the German Ministry of Science. To most, it was just a ruin. To Elias, it was a puzzle. While inspecting the dry-rotted floorboards of the attic, Elias noticed a discrepancy in the measurements. The room was 4 feet shorter than it should have been according to the exterior blueprints. He grabbed a crowbar and pried back a panel of soot-stained wood. Inside was a lead-lined cylinder, sealed with heavy wax. It didn't contain gold or jewelry. It contained a single roll of vellum, wrapped in a material that looked like silver silk. When Elias carefully unfurled it, he didn't see a map of Berlin or even a map of Europe. He saw a map of the Earth, but the continents were shifted, and there were massive land masses in the middle of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans that didn't exist in any geography book. "This is impossible," Elias whispered. The ink on the map wasn't black. It was a deep, shimmering violet that seemed to move when he looked at it from the corner of his eye. At the bottom of the vellum, written in frantic, shaky handwriting, were the words, "Project, 0. The war did not end, it merely changed dimensions. Do not look for the X. The X is looking for us." Elias took a photo of the map with his phone to send to his mentor, Dr. Eris Thorne. But the moment he hit send, his phone screen didn't show the loading bar. Instead, it turned into a solid block of gray static. A high-pitched frequency erupted from the speakers, so sharp it made Elias's ears bleed. Suddenly, the heavy oak door of the attic slammed shut. The temperature in the room plummeted until Elias could see his own breath. In the frost forming on the window pane, a word began to etch itself as if an invisible finger were writing, "Run." Elias grabbed the cylinder and dived through the small attic window, just as the floorboards he had been standing on erupted in a flash of soundless white light. He tumbled onto the fire escape, looking back to see the entire top floor of the villa being erased, not by fire, but by a shimmering distortion in the air that left nothing but empty space behind. He hit the ground running, the silver-wrapped map tucked under his arm. He didn't know it yet, but Elias had just unburied the forbidden map, a blueprint not of where the world was, but of where the world was being moved to. In 1945, the war had reached a stalemate not of bullets, but of physics. And someone had spent 80 years making sure the coordinates stayed hidden in that attic. As Elias reached the main street, he realized his phone was working again. But the time on the screen wasn't 2:14 p.m. It was midnight, and it was counting down. Elias ducked into a crowded subway station, his heart thumping against the lead-lined cylinder. The countdown on his phone was still ticking, 54 seconds. He tried to restart the device, but the screen was unresponsive to touch. Around him, the commuters of Berlin moved like ghosts, gray, blurred, and seemingly unaware of the high-pitched hum that was now vibrating through the very concrete of the platform. He found a payphone in a dark corner, a relic of the past that still functioned on analog lines. He dialed Dr. Eris Thorne's private number. "Eris, it's Elias. I found it. The attic, it's gone. Something erased it." "Elias? Listen to me very carefully." Eris's voice was distorted, layered with a strange metallic echo. "Do not go to your apartment. Do not go to the university. The map you're holding isn't just paper and ink. It's a folding key. The ink is made of a synthesized isotope the ministry was working on in '44. It doesn't show geography, it creates it." "What do you mean creates it?" Elias hissed, glancing at his phone. 12 seconds. "The continents on that map, they are the extractions. During the war, They realized the Earth was being invaded by a force from a parallel frequency, the static. To save the planet, they had to fold pieces of our world into a hidden dimension. That map is the only bridge back. If you have the map, you have the coordinates to the other Earth. The phone line went dead with a sound like a scream. Elias looked at his phone. Midnight. Suddenly, the subway station went silent. The roar of the arriving train vanished. The chatter of the crowd ceased. Elias looked out at the platform. Every person had stopped mid-stride. They weren't just standing still, they were translucent. He could see the pillars of the station through their bodies. A man in a sharp, 1940s-style trench coat stepped out of the frozen crowd. He wasn't translucent. He looked as solid as the steel tracks. His eyes were not human. They were two hollow pits of swirling violet light, identical to the ink on the map. "The map is a debt, Elias," the man said, his voice echoing from everywhere at once. "And the ministry has come to collect." The man raised a hand, and the air between them began to tear. It wasn't a physical rip, but a visual distortion, as if the reality of the subway station were a piece of paper being crumpled. Behind the tear, Elias didn't see the tunnels of Berlin. He saw a vast, dark ocean under a sky filled with two moons, the landmasses from the map. "Run, Elias," a voice whispered in his ear. It wasn't Eris. It was the map itself. Elias turned and bolted into the dark subway tunnel, leaping over the electrified rail. He didn't look back, but he could hear the sound of the world behind him being folded, the sound of concrete and glass being crushed into a single point of nothingness. He ran until his lungs burned, following the faint violet glow emanating from the cylinder. The tunnel seemed to stretch and warp. The modern brickwork of the 21st century subway began to transition into the reinforced concrete of a World War II-era bunker. The smell of ozone and stale cigarettes filled the air. He tripped over a rusted canister and fell hard. As he scrambled to his feet, he realized he wasn't in the subway anymore. He was in a massive underground hangar, filled with rows of strange, bell-shaped aircraft that bore no markings except for a single violet circle. At the end of the hangar stood a massive iron door with a wheel lock. Etched into the iron was the same warning he had seen in the attic. The war did not end. It merely changed dimensions. Elias grabbed the wheel and turned. As the door groaned open, he found himself staring not at a room, but at a laboratory frozen in time. Scientists in white coats were slumped over their desks, perfectly preserved not by ice, but by a field of static. And in the center of the room, suspended in a glass vat of shimmering violet fluid, was a woman. She opened her eyes. They were violet. "You're late," she said, her voice vibrating in his bones. "The extraction is already 80 years overdue." The woman in the vat didn't move her lips, yet her voice filled the laboratory like a resonant frequency. Elias stepped back, his hand trembling as he gripped the lead-lined cylinder. The scientists surrounding them were like statues made of dust. He realized that if he touched them, they would likely crumble into nothingness. They were caught in a time lock, a stasis field designed to wait for the person holding the forbidden map. "Who are you?" Elias managed to choke out. "And what is this place?" "I am the archive," she replied. The violet fluid in the vat began to drain, revealing that she wasn't wearing a lab coat, but a suit made of the same silver silk material that wrapped the map. And this is the 0-point anchor. In 1945, the ministry realized that our world was being overwritten by an external data stream, the static. To save the human blueprint, they didn't just hide a map, they hid a portion of reality. She stepped out of the vat, her feet hitting the cold floor with a metallic ring. She looked exactly as she might have in a 1940s photograph: sharp features, pinned back hair, but her skin had a faint, translucent quality. "The man in the subway," Elias said, "the one with the hollow eyes." He called the map a debt. The woman's expression darkened. "That was a collector. When the ministry folded the continents into the other Earth, they borrowed time from the static to stabilize the bridge. The map you hold is the contract. For 80 years, the static has been waiting for the debt to be paid in full. If the map returns to the anchor, the bridge closes and Earth is safe. But if the collectors take it, they override us," Elias finished, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. Suddenly, the massive iron door of the hangar began to glow red. Something was on the other side, melting through the reinforced metal with terrifying speed. The high-pitched hum returned, louder now, vibrating the glass vats until they shattered. "The collectors don't just want the map, Elias," the woman said, grabbing his arm. Her touch was ice cold. "They want the source code, the biological memory of someone from the unfolded world. They want you." She dragged him toward the back of the lab, where a massive circular platform sat beneath a web of copper coils. "The anchor is failing. The only way to save the map is to take it to the extraction zone. The landmass is shown on the vellum. You have to jump." "Jump where?" "Into another dimension," Elias shouted over the roar of the melting door. "I'm a historian, not a soldier. History is just a record of the wars we survived," she replied, pushing him onto the platform. "Today, you make sure there is a history to record." The iron door exploded inward, not in a burst of fire, but in a silent expansion of violet darkness. 3 figures in trench coats stepped through the smoke. They didn't walk, they glided, their hollow eyes fixed on the cylinder in Elias's hand. The air around them began to pixelate, turning the lab equipment into gray cubes of static. The woman slammed a lever on the console. "My name is Elena. Find the station of the 2 moons on the other side. Do not trust the sky." A blinding flash of violet light erupted from the copper coils. Elias felt his body being pulled apart atom by atom, stretched across a distance that shouldn't exist. He saw the lab vanish, saw the collectors lunging for his feet, and then absolute silence. He woke up face down in tall, purple grass. The air tasted like ozone and lavender. He looked up, and his heart stopped. The sky wasn't blue, it was a deep, bruised indigo. And hanging directly above him were 2 moons, one ivory, and one a jagged, broken shard of obsidian. He looked down at the map. The shimmering violet ink was now glowing so brightly it illuminated the dark forest around him. He had reached the other Earth. But as a low, mechanical growl echoed from the trees, he realized he wasn't alone. The extraction wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage. Elias stood in the purple grass, the lead-lined cylinder feeling like a literal weight on his soul. The mechanical growl from the treeline grew rhythmic, sounding less like an animal and more like a heavy engine struggling to turn over. He scrambled to his feet, clutching the forbidden map. In this world, the map didn't just shimmer, it vibrated, the violet ink bleeding off the vellum and forming tiny, floating geometric shapes that pointed toward the north. "Do not trust the sky," Elena had warned. He looked up. The ivory moon was beautiful, but the obsidian shard, the broken moon, seemed to be leaking a black, oily smoke that drifted toward the planet's surface. Where that smoke touched the indigo clouds, they turned into the familiar gray static of the collectors. The static wasn't just a force, it was an infection, and it was eating this hidden world too. A sudden flash of light cut through the purple forest. A searchlight. Elias dove behind a rock as a massive, bell-shaped craft, the same ones he had seen in the bunker, hovered silently overhead. Its underside was etched with the violet circle of the ministry. But it wasn't a rescue vessel. A mechanical voice boomed from its speakers in 1940s-era German, translated instantly in Elias's mind. The deck carrier is detected. Initiate retrieval of the source code. They're already here, Elias whispered. The collectors weren't just in Berlin. They were the wardens of this dimension. He ran in the direction the map's floating ink was pointing. The forest ended abruptly, revealing a massive, rust-covered industrial complex built into the side of a crystalline cliff. This was the Station of the Two Moons. It looked like a cross between a Victorian railway station and a nuclear power plant. As he neared the perimeter, a figure emerged from the shadows of a giant cooling tower. It was a man wearing a tattered RAF flight suit from the 1940s, his face weathered by decades of a sun that didn't exist on Earth. He held a flare gun pointed directly at Elias's chest. "You're late, lad," the man said, his English accent thick and gravelly. "We expected the map in 85, then 98, then 2010. By the time you arrived, half the extraction had already been overwritten." I just found it this morning," Elias panted, holding up the cylinder. "Elena sent me. She said this is the anchor." The man lowered the flare gun, his eyes softening but remaining sharp. "I'm Captain Miller. I've been guarding this gate since the day the continents folded. Elena is a memory, son. She's part of the lab's OS now. If she sent you, it means the primary Earth is starting to pixelate. The debt is being called in." Miller led Elias inside the station. The interior was a labyrinth of humming vacuum tubes, brass dials, and massive glass floor panels. Beneath the glass, Elias saw something that made his head spin. They weren't on a planet. They were on a massive, floating island of rock, and below them, he could see the primary Earth, Berlin, London, New York, flickering like a dying television screen. "We are the backup drive," Miller explained, pointing to a massive golden needle in the center of the room that was plunging into a pool of violet liquid. The ministry didn't just save people, they saved the frequency of Earth. But the static found the leak. They've been eating the edges of this world for 80 years to get to the needle. "If they get it?" Elias asked. "Then the format begins," Miller said grimly. "They wipe both worlds and start a new simulation. One without free will. One where time is a straight line they control." Suddenly, the station's alarms began to blare, a sound like 1,000 trumpets. The glass floor beneath their feet cracked. From the pixelated primary Earth below, a massive hand made of gray static, miles long, began to reach upward, clawing at the floating island. "The Collector Prime," Miller shouted, grabbing a heavy wrench. "He doesn't want the map anymore. He's coming for the needle. Elias, get to the top of the tower. The map isn't a key, it's a patch. You have to overlay it onto the needle." As the station shook, the violet-eyed figures in trench coats began to phase through the walls. They weren't glided anymore. They were running, their hollow eyes fixed on Elias. The ground beneath the station didn't just shake. It began to lose its physical properties. As the massive hand of the Collector Prime gripped the underside of the floating island, the metal floor beneath Elias's feet turned into a slurry of gray pixels. Gravity became erratic, pulling him toward the ceiling one moment and pinning him to the floor the next. "Go up the central spire," Captain Miller roared, firing his flare gun into the chest of an approaching collector. The flare didn't explode. It released a burst of white phosphorus that temporarily stabilized the air, turning the pixelated figure back into solid matter for just long enough to shatter it with a heavy wrench. Elias lunged for the spiral staircase that wrapped around the golden needle. The needle was no longer just a piece of machinery. It was a conduit, a mile-high lightning rod that connected the other Earth to the primary Earth below. As he climbed, he looked down through the cracks in the station. The primary Earth was a mess of corruption. He could see the skyline of Berlin, but it was being pulled apart like a digital tapestry, its threads being sucked into the hollow palms of the Collector Prime. The air grew thin and cold as Elias reached the summit of the tower. He was now standing on a narrow platform, surrounded by the indigo sky and the two moons. The obsidian shard, the broken moon, was now directly overhead, and it was opening like a massive, dark eye. "It's not a moon," Elias whispered, his voice caught in the wind. "It's a receiver." He pulled the forbidden map from its cylinder. The vellum was no longer just paper. It had become a sheet of pure, glowing violet energy. The geometric shapes floating above it were now a complex sequence of code, shifting and rotating in 3 dimensions. Suddenly, the platform shuddered. A figure phased through the floor, blocking the path to the needle's apex. It was the Collector from the subway, his trench coat billowing in the dimensional wind. But his face was different now. The hollow eyes had expanded, consuming his entire head until he was nothing but a humanoid shape of swirling, violet static. "The cycle must conclude, Elias." The entity spoke, its voice a chorus of 1 billion deleted souls. "The Ministry tried to save a moment in time, but time is a river that must flow. By holding the map, you are damming the river. You are the reason the world is rotting." "No," Elias shouted, holding the map like a shield. "The world is rotting because you're harvesting it. You're not the river, you're the parasite." The entity lunged, its hands turning into jagged shards of gray glass. Elias dodged, the map's energy singing against the entity's touch. He realized that the map wasn't just a patch for the world, it was a mirror. It reflected the source code of the person holding it. He looked at the golden needle. At the very tip was a small, circular indentation, the sync port. He had to press the map against it, but the entity was faster, its movements glitching through space to cut off his every path. "Miller, I can't get past him," Elias yelled into the void. From the depths of the station below, a massive explosion of white light erupted. Miller had detonated the station's primary vacuum tubes. The shockwave of pure time rippled upward, momentarily freezing the entity in place, its form stuttering between 1944 and 2026. "Now, lad, finish it." Miller's voice echoed one last time before being swallowed by the roar of the collapse. Elias didn't hesitate. He leapt across the gap, his fingers grazing the cold, vibrating gold of the needle. As the entity reached for his throat, Elias slammed the glowing violet map into the sync port. The sky didn't turn white. It turned black. For a heartbeat, there was no station, no moons, and no Berlin. There was only Elias and the map, suspended in a void of raw data. A prompt appeared in his mind, written in the frantic handwriting from the attic. "System recovery initiated. Overwrite primary Earth with backup." Elias looked at the prompt. If he hit yes, the world he knew would be replaced by the 1945 extraction. Everyone he knew in 2026 would be gone, replaced by the people who had been frozen for 80 years. If he hit no, the static would finish the harvest. But then he noticed a third option, hidden in the shimmering violet ink of the map's border. Merge. Elias didn't hesitate. He reached out into the void of data and pressed his hand against the word merge. The moment of contact felt like a lightning strike to his soul. This static didn't just stop, it began to sing. The violet ink of the map flowed out of the needle and began to weave through the gray pixels of the Collector Prime, turning the entity's jagged form into a glowing lattice of light. The two Earths, the vibrant, technological world of 2026 and the preserved, heroic world of 1945 began to pull toward each other, not as rivals, but as missing pieces of a single puzzle. "What are you doing?" The chorus of the collectors screamed, their voices fading into a whisper. "You are mixing the shadows with the light. The system cannot hold both." "The system doesn't have to hold it," Elias shouted into the wind. "We do." The golden needle erupted with a frequency that shattered the obsidian moon. The dark shard disintegrated into a million sparks of white light, raining down on the other Earth like a celestial snowfall. As the sparks touched the purple grass and the rusted industrial towers, the static was overwritten by a new reality. The people trapped in the time lock, the scientists, the soldiers, and Elena, began to wake up, their bodies becoming solid and warm. Below, the primary Earth of 2026 experienced a global echo. For 3 minutes, every person on the planet saw the faces of their ancestors. In the middle of modern-day Berlin, the shadows of 1945 villas appeared alongside glass skyscrapers, harmonizing into a city that was both old and new. The merge wasn't a replacement. It was a restoration of the Earth's lost memory. As the light reached its peak, Elias felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Captain Miller. The pilot looked younger now, his tattered suit replaced by a crisp, silver uniform. "You did it, lad," Miller said, his voice no longer gravelly but clear as a bell. "The debt is canceled. The static is grounded. We're finally home." "But where are we?" Elias asked, his vision blurring as the white light consumed the station. "We're in the present," Miller smiled. "The real one." Elias woke up on the floor of the attic in Berlin. The sun was streaming through the small window, casting long shadows across the soot-stained wood. He scrambled to his feet, looking for the lead-line cylinder. It was gone. The secret wall compartment was empty. He ran to the window and looked out. The city of Berlin was there, but it was different. In the distance, he could see the Station of the Two Moons built into a hillside, now a museum of ancient technology. People in the streets wore modern clothes, but the cars moved with the silent, bell-shaped engines he had seen in the hangar. The war hadn't ended in a stalemate. It had ended in a secret alliance that had shaped the last 80 years of a world Elias was only just beginning to recognize. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. The countdown was gone. In its place was a message from an unknown sender, dated 1944. To the one who found the map, history is a living thing. Thank you for giving it a future. Elena. Elias walked out of the villa and into the fresh air. He looked up at the sky. It was a perfect, deep blue. But if he squinted just right, he could see the faint, shimmering outline of a second moon, a guardian in the static, ensuring that the forbidden map would never need to be drawn again. The Heart Echoes logo appears on the screen as the music swells into a triumphant, orchestral finish. A final message fades in. The greatest mysteries are not found in the past, but in the versions of ourselves we chose to save.